like 29. In verse 29 of chapter 14, basically Peter says, hey, God, if it's you, then let me come out to you. And God just goes, hey, come on, man, let's go. Verse 29. And so then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. And as I was thinking about this, the top part of your notes there really is what I believe to be every man's struggle. All right, and that is broken down into 3 different areas, and they're usually these areas, is that we have victory in our life, and usually victory is followed by distraction, and then distraction leads to failure. And that's really what happens in this story. All right, the victory was Peter's walking on water. Right? Let's not lose sight of what's going on here. He's walking on water. All right. He would have been familiar with water because he grew up around it. He would have been familiar with water because he worked on it. He spent his entire life in water, and yet he had never walked on water before. And it was only a couple steps walking on water. The rest of the guys in the boat are like, I can't believe he's doing it. I can't believe he's doing it. And so he had a victorious moment in God, but it wasn't long before the victorious moment became a distraction-filled. He got out of the boat, he's walking towards him, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid. When he saw the wind, he was afraid. Distraction. And we're going to talk about that because this is every man's battle, is victory is always followed with distraction because we have an enemy of our soul that wants us defeated. All right? We can never just stay in the moment of victory. It'd be great if we could, but we can't. And then ultimately distraction leads to failure. So as he took his eyes off of God and he put them on the wind, it says he began to sink. You're saying, well, can we really call it failure? Because, he was the only one that got out of the boat to begin with. Well, it's failure in this aspect. When Jesus helped him up out of the water, what did Jesus say to him? Oh, you have little faith. Where's your faith at? Why did you doubt? So he failed in the moment. So we have this incredible victory followed by this incredible distraction followed by this incredible failure. All right? And this is our battle. And this is what happens in our personal spiritual lives. Is that we have moments of victory, and then the victory is wonderful, and we're on cloud 9, we're at the top of the summit, we're whatever metaphor you want to use. We're hitting for the cycle, or whatever. Life is great, but then distraction comes. All right? And then distraction comes and it bites us. And then if we allow ourselves to continue to be led by distraction, all right, then what does it lead to? It leads to failure. And this becomes kind of the cycle in most people's spiritual lives. Very few people live in victory all the time. They really, because we're human. All right? So we go from victory to distraction to failure to getting back up to victory. And so as I was thinking about how do we program our spiritual lives so that they will matter all the time and we can stay focused on the Lord with these 3 things in mind: victory, distraction, and failure. Well, that's the 3 points I have for you there. And we're just going to talk about these, and we're a pretty small group, and so I just encourage you, if you want to speak out or whatever, don't raise your hand. Let's just make this kind of a communal, kind of a potpourri of wisdom and knowledge here, all of us together. But the first thing that we understand and what keeps us from really living in victory is that we grow too comfortable in the current victory. All right, we grow too comfortable in the current victory. And what I mean by that is that once we've experienced victory in our lives, all right, the way that God designed us, He designed us to experience victory after victory after victory after victory after victory. It's the Lord Himself that said what? My promises are new every morning. I don't want you to live on yesterday's. I don't want you to live on yesterday's manna. Everywhere that God provided, His idea was you're going to have new and fresh tomorrow. All right? So keep that in mind. So the Lord's way of us living our lives is that we have victory today, but tomorrow we don't dwell and we don't, just look at the pictures of yesterday's victory. He wants us to be victorious today as well, but a new victory. And tomorrow, a new victory. And tomorrow, a new victory. But what happens is that when we experience victory, what do we want to do? We want to put the flag in the ground. We want to build a camp right here. And we're like, okay, let's just live right here in this moment. Because it's a great moment. All
Yeah,
right?
everybody likes a celebration.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's just like, hey, let's just gather everybody right here. Let's just party right here. All right? This is what we want.
That's the worst thing you can do.
That's the worst thing anybody can do, really.
Well, you gotta realize, this is warfare. You know, and in the military you're taught, when you take ground, you set up a perimeter, defense perimeter. Because you know the enemy's gonna come and try and take that ground back.
Sure.
And that, you know, that's where we lose it. We get up there, oh, this is great, you know, and we don't set up our defense perimeter, knowing that the attack is gonna come and we're not ready for it.
Right. We become comfortable in the victory, you know.
Yeah, we get overrun.
And as we think of like Bible people, men in the Bible, and we can think of, boy, ultimately their failure was the initiation of their failure was they became comfortable in victory. The one that comes right off the top of our head is Samson. I mean, think of Samson. I mean, the guy never lost a fight, ever. And it got to the point where he started playing games with the victory because he was comfortable in his victory. Now, I don't know about you, but I mean, Samson, you know, he's in the Judges. I mean, Samson's smart. I mean, Samson was like the man. I mean, we kind of tend to think that he was like an Arnold Schwarzenegger, like just big, massive, strong, but really nothing up here. But Samson had the total package. He really did. And what happens is that he meets this girl and he's just infatuated with this girl, and yet Samson is continuing to live in the moment of victory. He thinks he's untouchable. So he's never aspiring to greater things of God. He just kind of parks it right here in this area of victory. Delilah asked him one night, hey, what's the secret of your strength? Well, I mean, if you were to take some cords and wrap me around and all that while I'm asleep, then I'll be as weak as you know, basically. And so he falls asleep, and she goes, Samson, then wake up, the Philistines are here. And he wakes up, and sure enough, he's wrapped exactly like he told Delilah he should be wrapped to take his strength away. Well, he busts the cords around him, and he just, you know, chases him out of the house or whatever. And it never once comes across this man who was intelligent. You know, when she asked me, I probably shouldn't say anything. But you know what happened? He got comfortable in victory. He literally thought that there was nothing that could keep him bound. And so ultimately what happens is he says, well, you know, I took a Nazirite vow. If you shave my head, then I'll be as weak as can be. You know what? Samson did not expect that to work. You know, and some people will say, well, he went bald and so he lost his strength. No, he lost his strength because he stepped out of the relationship that God had set apart for him to be in. God had called him to be a Nazirite. And as soon as he went against the Nazirite vow, he went against God. And God basically says, okay, you're done. You're done. So his strength was not in his hair. His strength was in his commitment to God. All right, which was, as a Nazirite, you don't cut your hair. And so, and God had really given him some leeway anyway. Because as a Nazirite, he was not supposed to touch anything that was unclean. And yet what did he do? He ate honey out of the carcass of a lion, which would have been considered unclean. So, I mean, he was kind of, you know, walking a kind of a fine line there anyway. But you see, he got comfortable in the victory, and it wasn't long before he was distracted, and ultimately he failed. Another story, we think of when Joshua led the Israelites across the Jordan, and the first city they come to is Jericho. All right, and God says, okay, this is what you're going to do. You're going to march around it, and they marched, and they blew the trumpets, and he says, and you're not to take anything, all right, and you have to not let anything live, all right. So this is what you're going to do. Well, you know, in the process of the chaos of the walls coming down and the Philistines, I should say those residents of Jericho running away, and Jerichoites running away, and the commotion of things, the saving of Rahab's family, and all that sort of stuff. In that commotion, Achan decides he's going to take just a few things, because they're not going to notice a couple shekels, they're not going to notice a robe, they're not going to notice some of these things, right? And anyway, Achan's looking around and says, and God still gave us victory even though I took some of these small things, so it's okay. It's okay. And this becomes one of the problems is we can allow the overall success of victory overshadow some of the small things that we just need to deal with in our lives. So in other words, what happens is that you start, you know, your life your week off great with victory at church. God does some amazing, amazing things, and you want to just continue to just live in that moment of victory. All right? But the problem is, after Monday morning getting up, you're still in the shower, you're singing, Open Up the Heavens, because they sing that in church on Sunday. It's still in your mind. Things are going great in your life and so forth. But you've lacked the consistency. You're still living on the victory. You've gone comfortable in the victory experience Sunday, but it's now Monday. All right, Tuesday comes along, you're not as excited. All right, Tuesday comes along and you're not singing in the shower like you were on Monday morning. You don't feel like singing in the shower. All right? And Wednesday comes along and you're singing, Hotel California by the Eagles in the shower or something like that. I mean, you're just far now. It's just kind of like, oh, what's happening? What happened was you got so comfortable in the victory of Sunday that you didn't realize, and you now have missed the victories of Monday that God wanted to give you, and the victories of Tuesday that God wanted to give you, and the victories of Wednesday that God wanted to give you. And God says, listen, my victories are new every day for you. I've got something new for you every day. And so what happens is Achan takes it because he thinks everything's going to be fine, and they got comfortable in the victory of Jericho. So Achan has got some stuff hidden in his tent. They send out a couple spies to go out and look at the next city they come to, which is the city of Ai. They send out a couple spies, and spies come back, and what did they say? They say, oh, they're puny down there. We only need about 3,000 guys. I mean, this is going to be a piece of cake. We could beat them with our hands tied behind our back, basically. So Joshua's okay, we'll only send 3,000. So it's almost like they're living off the victory of Jericho, and they're not putting forth the same effort. Not only that, but Achan's got hidden sin. I mean, they're just not living up to the standard of God, which was the standard of Jericho when they first came into the nation. So they go down there, and the 3,000 just get obliterated. And Joshua's like, what happened? And God basically says, well, there's sin in the camp. But you basically say also, you're not the same people. The same people that came across the Jordan and defeated Jericho are not the same people that left Jericho. You guys got too comfortable in victory. All right? They ended up defeating Ai, but it was after Achan and his family were, and they did it with the full army. They did it with everybody, And so when you stop and you think about it, you realize that sometimes we can get caught in the comfortableness of victory. And so what we need to do is every single day we need to be consistent. So when I get up today, I need to do the things today that will bring about victory today. And I can't think about yesterday's victory. And it boils down to this. How do we understand victory in Christ? We have to know Him. You have to read His Word, and you have to pray. You got to talk to Him. The more you talk to Him, the more you're going to want to read His Word. Because it's His love book to us. It's His love story to us. So the more you spend time with Him, the more you're going to want to read His Word. And you're saying, well, I'm told that every day, How do you live for God the right way? Well, you got to read your Bible and pray. Well, but it's that simple. You just have to commit to victory. You have to commit to doing it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no shortcuts to that. There's no way around it. There's nothing. I mean, there's no substitute. You just have to say, okay, I'm going to read the Word. I'm going to read the Word. And sometimes it's more difficult than it is at other times in our lives. Sometimes it's easier than it is. Sometimes, and technology has helped because it's really removed every excuse you could possibly have. I talked with a gentleman a couple years ago who was really challenged by getting the Word of God into his spirit. And I said, well, what's your biggest challenge? And his first biggest challenge was the fact that he can't stand to read. His next biggest challenge was the fact that he was a over-the-road truck driver and spent 8 hours in a cab. I said, then you need the Bible on CD. I said, they make that now. And I said, you could knock out 4 books a day. And he goes, really? I said, yeah. And so he started listening to the Word of God, and it was read to him, all right, the Bible on CD, and all of a sudden his life started to change. He started seeing more victories in his life because he was just simply preparing himself for victory every day. He wasn't just living from week to week. It's one of the problems we have with why Sunday mornings sometimes aren't all that we expect or aspire for them to be, because we've got too many people that are coasting in on fumes spiritually Sunday morning, and it's taken them just an hour just to get filled up again, rather than people that are already coming in filled ready to worship, ready to really hear from God and trust God. And so, don't grow too comfortable in current victories. The next thing you have to understand, number 2, is this. Expect the distractions, but don't let them steal your attentions. Expect the distractions, but don't let them steal your attentions. When Peter stepped out of the boat, the waves and the storm were already present. They didn't get worse the closer he got to Christ. They didn't. They were the waves were as high and the wind was as strong when he stepped out of the boat as when he got to Christ. So the distractions were always there. Just what happened halfway through that journey is that all of a sudden the distractions stole his attention. They stole his attention. His eyes went from this to this. You're saying, well, what happened? Well, why did it happen? Well, one thing that might have happened is he might have just got comfortable in the victory. I would imagine the first 4 or 5 steps he took on the water were very cautious and were very focused steps, because he's walking on water. I would imagine that every step was as careful as could be, looking right at Jesus like this. But after he realized, hey, I'm walking on water, he got a little comfortable in the victory. And when you get comfortable in the victory, you lower your guard down a little bit. Right? You stop doing what you did to get you to the victory. And now, those things that have been around you as distractions, now they start to steal your attention. And as he's walking, all of a sudden he says, oh my, look how big the waves are. Wow, it is really windy out here. And as soon as he did that, he started to fall. Now, I don't know if the sinking was kind of like a progressive sinking. I don't know if it was like all of a sudden he was walking, now it's like knee, now it's like waist, now it's like up to his chest. Or as soon as he took his eyes off the Lord, boom, he went. But either way, he was distracted. All right, these distractions stole his attentions, and this is one of the things when I talk to men about their spiritual life, and I always talk to men about this, is that we start thinking about the types of distractions that the enemy wants to have on our lives. All right, the biggest distraction that the enemy tries to really defeat us with is the distraction of lust. It just happens. Sometimes it's like, I've asked God many times, oh God, why do you have to make men a creature that is visually stimulated? Why couldn't we be the emotionally stimulated ones like our wives? You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, you made it so hard for us, God. That's those sort of things. And what happens is that the enemy knows these things, and we've never lived in a more hyper sensualized world than we live in now. All right? And so there's distractions everywhere. And there's nothing you can do about the distractions. There was nothing Peter could do about the wind and the waves. All right? The only thing he could do is he could say, okay, I'm not going to let these distractions steal my attention. I'm going to stay focused on the Lord. So now we as men, part of our spiritual growth is, okay, how do we keep ourselves from having the distractions steal our attention? All right? That's the big one. That's the big one. The first thing that I'll say is this. You have to become temptation literate. All right? It's kind of a phrase that I've kind of coined, but temptation literate. You have to know, you have to be able to read the signs. Where are you tempted and how are you tempted? And then stay away from them. Stay away from them. Give a couple examples. I do a lot with counseling men on this area, more so recently on the area of lust. It's just like whatever. And I've talked with men, and about several years ago, it's probably, at least 10 years ago now, I was in my former church. A man came in, and a great man of God, and I want to just encourage you, great man of God, and loved the Lord, loved his family and all that, but he came in and he was struggling. He said, I've really been struggling more lately than ever with lust. Really been struggling with this. And of course we go over some of the basics, and first of all, are you become too comfortable in your victory? Are you reading your word every day? And he said, yeah, I'm reading all that. And I said, okay, well then now let's talk about when you struggle most. All right, when you struggle most. Think of the last time you really struggled with lust. Where were you? What happened? What did it look like? Because we have to start to find out and read the signs so that you can avoid them. All right? And he says, well, last time, my wife, it was a Saturday, my wife had to go to the mall and all that, and I went to the mall with her, and I can't stand to walk around the mall. So I just got like a 32-ounce soda, and I sat in the middle of the mall and just watched people. And I said, well, who hangs out in a mall on Saturday afternoons? I said, 15-year-old girls that want to be 25. And I said, really? Walk around the mall. Girls are dressed because they want attention. They want eyes on them. That's what they want. I said, you're really putting yourself in a dangerous position. You know? I mean, I've been to the mall, and I've seen the girls that walk around the mall, and you get the tight jeans or the short shorts or whatever it might be. You know, and I said, that's not really a good place to be. He goes, what should I do? I said, well, when you go to the mall, just have your eyes focused on your wife. And what was she doing? Well, she was trying on clothes. I said, well, then walk and you sit right outside her dressing room.
Hold her handbag.
Yeah. And when she comes out, you have her try on the clothes for you. I said, that's what you do. You know, you keep your eyes for your wife, you know. And so I said, you need to become more temptation literate here. You know, the enemy knows he has you. Once you buy the soda and you park your butt down on the bench in the middle of the mall, the enemy is grinning ear to ear because he knows he has you. Because he's going to send distractions your way. And it won't be long before those distractions steal your attention. And that which was visual now becomes something that's mental, now becomes something that now gets into your heart even. And I said, and you can't have that. You need to defeat that. You know, another thing that I often tell men is this, and you probably have heard this before, you have to make your eyes bounce. And men, we have to make our eyes bounce. You know, it's not a sin to recognize a distraction. I mean, you're going to see a pretty woman walk by. It happens. All right? That's going to happen. All right? But you've got to make your eyes bounce. You can't dwell on it. That which could be a distraction needs to be like, okay, I'm off of that and thinking about something else, or I'm turning my back, or I'm going the opposite direction, or whatever. You got to make your eyes bounce because we're very visually stimulated. We're very visually stimulated. When I talk to women, it's the opposite. They usually are not visually stimulated. They've got to let their emotions bounce. You know, I tell the women, I said, you know, ugliest mug in the world at a woman's workplace, you know, she could have not even one inkling of attraction to this guy whatsoever. But if she hasn't heard in a long time that she's pretty or that she looks nice, and he says, you know, you look nice today, immediately, wow, that's like nourishment for kind of a thirsty soul that she has. All right? That is a distraction that if she doesn't watch out, it could steal her attention. Now the very next day she wants to look nice, not because she just wants to look nice, now she wants to look nice because maybe that guy will notice you look nice again. And I've talked to women and men about these things. And so you've got to become temptation literate. All right? You cannot, you have to keep distraction at arm's length. You really do. One of the things that I encourage men to do is you also have to be able, if you're married, you've got to invite your wife into this part of your life, and vice versa. And this is hard for guys at first. But at some point, your wife is going to want to help you if she loves the Lord and she loves you. All right? I use this example. When we first got married, we were married maybe a year or two, and something that my wife just loved to watch. Like most women like to watch it, but we were in our early 20s, we were just married. She liked to watch like the Miss America pageants, because she just loved that. Who's Miss Pennsylvania and all that sort of stuff. Well, you know, being the good husband and the dutiful husband, I'd watch it with her, and I'd sit there, and it got to the point, like, you know what, I don't want to watch this anymore. And I got to the point where I didn't want to watch it, and I was in the other room or whatever, and she was like, why did you want to watch it? Oh, it's so nice, you know, we can see who wins and all that. I said, Michelle, I really don't want to. Finally, I just told her, I said, Michelle, I don't want to, it's not good for me to see other ladies in swimsuits. I mean, it really isn't. And it's really not good for me to see Miss Wisconsin in a swimsuit and then you ask me, do you think she's pretty? You know, now I can lie like I have been on the couch next to you and be like, oh, no, not at all, not at all. But inside my spirit, it's like, whoa. And I said, it's not good. And you know what my wife did? She goes, okay, then we won't watch this anymore. And she completely changed. Why? Because she loves me. She didn't struggle with stuff like that, but she became a help for me. Recently there was a young man who struggled with lust from the computer aspect. All right, they had one desktop computer in their home, and he struggled because he wasn't even looking for it at times, but routinely he would find himself drawn to those things. And you don't even have to be looking for it, by the way. It'll find you, you know. The devil's clever. And he came in and he says, I'm really struggling with this. And I said, okay, let's become temptation literate. Let's read the signs. When do you struggle most? I struggle most when my wife leaves the house because there's nobody there. I said, oh, this is an easy fix. He goes, what is it? Every time your wife leaves the house, she takes the computer power cord with her. And he goes, that's stupid. I said, well, but it's an easy fix, because your computer won't work without its power cord. And he's like, well, she shouldn't have to do that. Well, I said, I totally agree with that. And in the garden, pre-sin, she wouldn't have to do that. But you know what? We live in a pretty cruddy world now. And I said, I bet your wife would be willing to help you with that. And you know what? He was embarrassed, but ultimately he told his wife that he struggled with stuff like that. And you know what? She didn't hit him or, spite him or, curse at him or get disgusted by him. You know what she did? She says, you know what, honey? I love you so much. I'll do whatever you want. And I said, that's what it's about. So I encourage you, become temptation literate and just keep those things from you. And then the third thing is this. Remember, failure does not have to be fatal. We mentioned how Peter, he failed. Peter failed. But failure does not have to be fatal. One of the things that we often struggle with is that we really think when we fail that we'll just give up now. We'll just give up. Something that often gets said is when we fail, we start to become discouraged. And then we start asking questions that the enemy wants us to ask ourselves, like, why do I even try? I'm just going to fail again. I'm just going to fail again. But in the story, Peter's failure didn't end in a fatality. That pretty much ruins the story. Think about it. If it reads this way, and Peter looked at the wind and he started to sink, and just as he was getting ready to call out Jesus' name, he drowned and he sank to the bottom of the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus finally got to the boat and he looked at the 11 that were left and said, well, aren't you guys glad you didn't get out of there? The end. That pretty much ruins the story, doesn't it, if Peter dies? Yeah, pretty much, it's pretty much like, wow, ooh, But that's not what happened. Peter's failure didn't end up in his fatality. It was a learning experience. It was a growing experience. And the Lord helped him and sustained him. And Peter would end up experiencing incredible victories in his life because this one failure didn't end up being a fatality. And if you look at Peter's life, he would have several other failures. Pastor Wade talked about it. He failed God when he basically usurped his authority and said, I won't let you die, that sort of thing. He was told, Satan, get behind me. He failed God when he says, I will never deny you. And he did it 3 times. And you can see these kind of failures stacking up. And yet, neither of those failures ever ended up becoming a fatality to Peter. He didn't die that way. He didn't die that way. And so when we fail, it's not the end of the world. It just gives us an opportunity to experience greater victories. But we have to yield to Christ. You have to yield to Christ. All right? The only way Peter's getting up out of the water is by the hand of Jesus. By the hand of Jesus. Sadly, what we try to do is this, is that when we're walking towards Jesus in victory and we fail, one of the first things that we do spiritually in our lives is we turn around and we try to swim back to the boat. That's what we try to do. We try to do it ourselves. Man, if I could just swim back to the boat, I'll be fine. And in that we're taking on water, we're nearly drowning, we're up over our head, we're frustrated for the next 2 weeks or whatever. Peter didn't try to swim back to the boat. What did Peter do? Jesus helped me, and he took his hand. So when we fail in trying to serve the Lord, the only opportunity for success after failure is to continue on with the Lord. Lord, help me. I really believe the altar of the church happens to be that's basically the hand up out of the water, so to speak, of the Christian life. When you just have had a rough week, you've had a rough day, your family's going through it, whatever it might be. There's just been failure. Victory was 3 days ago, but boy, today it's been, I'm swamped by waves and by wind and by water, and I am just drowning. And then the pastor opens up the altar and says, just come forward. That's basically like the hand up that the Lord gives, because he meets us right where we're at. Yet many times we struggle with going to the altar because we think as soon as we step out of the pew, what's going to happen? Everybody that's seated around us is going to be like, I wonder what their problem is. Oh, I wonder what he did. Well, I heard he was kind of messed up. You know, I mean, we begin to think that, and so we allow those that are still in the boat to dictate what we're going to do out in the water. You know, it's very likely that because of the height of the waves that they can kind of guesstimate we're there, because the wind and the storms come down over the Sea of Galilee and they just thrash, all right? And they say that waves, even though it's not a very large, in fact, many times it's called Lake Gennesaret as opposed to the Sea of Galilee. But many times, you know, they say waves would get in this small confined space, they could get anywhere from 10 to 12 feet high. In a body of land, a body of water that's only 8 miles wide, you know? And so when you stop and you think about it, I mean, it's very likely that when Peter was sinking, nobody from the boat could even tell he was sinking. Because they were trying to see through waves and through wind, and the boat's going like this, and whatever it might be. So it's very likely that the only thing they saw was Peter walking off into the distance, and the next thing they see is Jesus and Peter walking back together into the boat. It's very likely Peter had to tell them, guys, you should see what happened to me out there. You know? Peter, at that moment, didn't care about what the guys in the boat thought. It's very likely, too, when you're failing, nobody in the boat that's left in the boat or in the pews behind you, they don't even have a clue what's going on in your life. And so we fail to reach out to the Lord because of people who don't have a clue what they might assume might be going on in our lives. And so we've got to be careful about that. We have to be careful about that. And then the real question is this, and this really is kind of getting down to the brass tacks here, is sometimes we ask the question after this story, you know, why didn't Peter just stay in the boat? You know, this would have, I mean, Jesus was on his way to the boat. Why didn't Peter just stay in the boat? All right, but I don't think that's the real question when it comes to our spiritual life, focusing on God. I think the real question that I have is this: why didn't the others leave the boat? Now, I imagine why they might not have left at first and been the first one to say, hey, let me walk on water if it's really you, because Peter was the most brazen of them all. If anybody was going to say, hey, let me walk on water too, it was going to be Peter. But, I mean, after 1 or 2 steps, why didn't Andrew jump out? I mean, he was his brother. Why didn't he jump out and say, Peter, wait up for me? I mean, because they physically saw him walking at least those first 2 steps. And yet nobody else got out of the boat. Nobody else got out of the boat. And I guess the reality of it is this, is that this is where camaraderie comes in. You need to find somebody who's willing to walk on the waters with you. All right? Don't walk alone. You know, your spiritual life could be outstanding with what God has blessed you with. But it'll be even greater if you're able to do this walk with somebody. If you're married, your wife definitely needs to be the person that walks with you. But as men, sometimes you just need men to support you. It's one thing that I really encourage men to get involved with our men's group here on some level, whether it be Sunday morning or Wednesday night or whatever it might be, because you know, iron sharpens iron, you know. And what's happening is you realize, you know, when I start to slip and fall, yes, the Lord is the only one that can pull me up out of the water. But guess what? I'm not out here by myself. There are men who have been walking on this water with me, and they'll grab my arms. They'll help. They'll assist. You know, they won't let the waves overcome me, overwhelm me. And so when we stop and we think about our spiritual life and focusing on Jesus, we really think of these 3 things. And we've got about 7 minutes left. And I really wanted to just challenge you guys, since we've got a small enough group here, as we think about these things that really keep us from really focusing on Christ and being victorious all the time. The one was we grow too comfortable in current victories, that we don't really prepare ourselves for future victories. The second one was that we allow the distractions to steal our attentions. And then the third one was sometimes, you know, we allow failures to be fatalities to our life spiritually. All right? When you think about those 3 things, and you just kind of do an assessment of your own spiritual life, which one would you say you probably struggle with the most of those 3 things? What becomes the biggest hindrance to you experiencing victory in your everyday life? Whether it be the too comfortable in past victories, the distractions that steal your attentions, or failure has kind of left you in a state of comatose. You just don't want to try anymore. What would you say if you were to do an assessment of your own spiritual life?
Let's say the first one,
Mm-hmm.
victory.
Okay.
A lot of times we want the big victory,
Right.
and we don't even recognize the little battles that we're winning
Okay.
on a daily basis, you know.
Right.
So we become discouraged, thinking every victory has to be huge.
Right.
You know, we don't, so I think that's one for me.
Right.
That
All right.
I don't see some of the little things that
All right.
are actually
You're
victory.
missing some of the daily victories that God has for you.
Right.
All right. Yeah, we grow comfortable with the big victories, you know, and that's what we want. That becomes the standard in our life, and yet we don't see the smaller victories that God wants us to win.
Yeah, we want to win the war when we don't want to play with the little battles that are going on.
Yeah. All right. Who else? What else? What would you say?
Distractions.
Distractions.
I mean, nowadays they're everywhere. You fight off one distraction and yet there's another. You know,
Absolutely.
it could be from the TV to the computer to the radio, and
Absolutely.
we're always on the move doing something, and all that stuff's available right at your fingertips.
Absolutely.
From your iPhone or your telephone to anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what kind of happens sometimes is that sometimes without even knowing it, the devil he allows us to set our own traps. He allows us to set our own traps. He really does. And we don't even realize we're doing it, but he just allows us to do that. And you know, one of the things that you know we have to be careful of is being able to keep those distractions at arm's length. And one of the things that I love music. I've always been a huge music fan. I really have. I love music. I grew up listening basically to 80s rock. All right, anything 80s I like, even like in late 70s, although I was young, but it kind of carried over into the 80s. And so you give me anything from Boston or Kansas all the way through John Mellencamp to Bruce Springsteen, all that. I like rock, you know, and I listened to it, and on the surface, most of those songs are not overtly bad at all. You know, in
But a lot of
fact,
times you just like the beat.
that's
and you don't even
exactly
really listen to
right.
the
That's
words.
exactly right. It's not overtly bad. But you know what I found? I found that it was a distraction from the things of God. And so I found that every time I get in a car, you know, instead of listening to worship or whatever, I'd listen to the music that I grew up on or something like that. And I'm not saying that it's bad to listen to that music all the time. I mean, I think there's some cool things, you know, and it's good. And sometimes, like I like just this morning, I told the first class this morning, I use this example. Like this morning, I was just driving, and you know, for some reason, my car drives faster and smoother when I listen to Boston. I don't know why, but it just, you know,
It's just more than a feeling.
that's right, more than a feeling. Actually, it was Amanda. But yeah, but you know what I found was that my spirit was that which was a distraction from my spiritual growth. It really started to steal my attention to that's what I always wanted to listen to. And so I had to make a conscientious decision. What I was doing is I was setting my own trap. And the devil was letting me set my trap. You know? And it wasn't like I was listening to music that had foul language or whatever. I mean, it wasn't that at all. But anything that doesn't glorify God in some ways keeps me from getting closer to God, you know? And there's this distance that's there. And so I kind of realized, you know what, I can't do this as often as I want to do this, you know? And so the devil will let you set your own traps when it comes to distraction. You know, he'll just let you do that. And, you know, we have to be very, 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 very careful of these things, you know? Like I said, you know, we can put ourselves in a tough situation. Something that I stopped doing, and I really became smart to this, probably several years ago, when I started realizing the makeup of women. And I started realizing that, especially in a church setting or whatever, there are some women here that have spiritually and emotionally, they've been battered. They've just been battered. And about, maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, I made the conscientious decision that I'm not going to compliment women on their looks. Ever. Ever. The only 2 women that get compliments on their looks from me are my wife and my daughter. And the reason I did that, and you're saying, well, what's so bad about telling a lady that her hair looks nice? the problem is that I could be setting a trap. You know, I don't know the background of this woman, but if she hasn't been told by her husband that she looks good any time in the last 6 months,
a little bit.
yeah, and I say, hey, your hair looks really good. Guess what? The very next day, she's going to do her hair especially nice. Why? Because maybe Pastor Chad will notice her hair is nice. And I started realizing these things. And I thought, boy, I could be setting my own trap if I'm not careful. And so, you know, we've got to be very sensitive to these things. All right? And really ask the Lord to help us. You know, and then eventually you end up doing big things. You know, one thing that we did a couple years ago, and at first it was done for financial reasons, but ultimately ended up being done for this very reason, is we got rid of television. We have television, but we don't have cable, we don't have satellite. We have Netflix, which we can control by rating. And we eliminated a lot of hassle. We eliminated a lot of distractions that were in our home. You know, and you know, we find now that we hardly ever watch any television. And it's almost freeing for my wife and I to hear people talking about a show, I guess, that's popular, and for us to realize that we don't have a clue what they're talking about. It's almost like, oh, I'm so glad I'm not obsessed by that. You know, I'm so glad.
Trapped in that.
I'm so glad that my life, my schedule is not run by being home on Thursday nights by 8 o'clock. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm so glad I'm just free from that, you know? And so we've got to be careful and help ourselves with distractions. This is where the camaraderie comes in. Because with camaraderie comes accountability, right? With camaraderie becomes accountability. And you just know, okay, listen, okay, my ears and my eyes are going to be attentive now. Because I've got a brother with me. I've got a sister with me. I've got, you know, somebody with me and so forth. And it's just like, oh, thank God for you, brother. Thank God that you got out of the boat and you're walking with me. And so this is what spiritual life is all about. You're saying, well, this sounds kind of simple. It's simple to digest. It's almost impossible to implement. It's hard. And this is why what Paul uses words like dying daily. You know, carrying your cross daily. I mean, those are not pretty images. Those are images of, oh. And even Paul, boy, the things that I want to do, I don't do. The things I don't want to do, I do. It's like, ugh, it's ridiculous. It's hard. It is hard. But the reward is worth it. The reward is worth it. So, I just encourage you guys, you know, spiritual life. It's a journey. Make sure that you don't get too comfortable in the victories. Make sure that you don't allow distractions, all right, to steal your attention. And definitely make sure that when you do fail, that it's not a fatality. Don't live in discouragement, but get back up. Get back up. And realize that it's so much easier when somebody's walking with you. You know, don't try to be a lone ranger. You know, don't try to be a lone ranger. I think it's an interesting thing. You know, we call him the Lone Ranger, but you know, there was never an episode of the Lone Ranger where he did anything by himself. There was always Tonto. You know, and I always thought that's kind of an oxymoron. He's the Lone Ranger, but the reality is that in every episode I ever watched, every black and white episode I ever watched of the Lone Ranger, all right, he usually got into a mess that Tonto helped him get out of. You know? So maybe we should have been the Duo Ranger or something like that. I don't know, but that's it. Let's close in prayer. God, thank you. Thank you for your word, and thank you for just your instruction. God, I thank you for what you've done in our lives. Bless these men, and God, may they feel more equipped after today to go to their wives, to go to their homes, to talk to their kids, to be leaders in their church. God, just to be a friend to their friend. May today have been a day of equipping them for greater service. And so, God, we give you the praise and the glory for all that you've done and all that you're doing. In Jesus' name.